Welcome to Product Academy Tough Stuff, the podcast where we cut through the noise and get straight to the toughest challenges in product management. I'm Tanya Lau.
And I'm Francesca Cortesi.
In each episode, we tackle one tough question. No fluff, no filler. Just candid insights from seasoned product leaders.
Our guests deliver actionable, real-world answers. Whether you're an experienced product leader or just stepping into the product world, this is your go-to podcast for sharp, tested advice, condensed for your busy schedule.
One tough challenge, practical insights, short and real.
Let's dive in.
Today's tough question is one that I think many of us product people recognize themselves in. And it's about, how do I quantify my initiative? And I've myself, and I believe many of you, have been many times in this situation when you're like someone from sales or marketing or whomever ask for a meeting and they come to you and say, oh my God, we need to do this. We have a client who needs this right now. And if we're not doing it, you're leaving 200,000, 100,000, 1 million. Insert your favorite number on the table. Do it. And you don't really know how to answer to that because the immediate answer will be, that's not in the roadmap. But well, the other person doesn't really care. Right? So, we need another type of language and we need to show that we understand the business and we need to be able to quantify those initiatives. But how do we do it? So today we have Rich Mironov here that will tell us all how to do it in the perfect way. So we come back with the perfect answer when those people come at our table. Welcome, Rich.
Thank you so much. Thank you for letting me join, Francesca.
So how do we do it? I know that you've been talking about this product at heart, and you probably heard many people with this kind of challenges. How would you answer to those questions?
I think it's a central question. It's really important to most of what we do. My first observation, as you said, is that the folks on the go-to-market side, particularly sales, and I'm an enterprise guy, so they tend to be small numbers of very large deals. And that sales team only has one deal to close this quarter. So, of course, it's the most important deal in the world in history, right? I think we have to recognize that when we talk about the language of process, Scrum and backlogs and roadmaps and, development methodologies and testing in UX, no one on the enterprise sales side of your company cares about that at all. In fact, it sounds like excuses. It sounds like we're not really addressing the issue. And so I'm always coaching the CPOs and product leaders I work with to have really two different sets of language. One is how we talk with our developer, designer, maker teams and goals and building great software. And one is how we talk with the finance and sales side of our houses, which is about the language of money and semi-quantifying. The other thing I'd back up on for a second is the idea that we can see the future perfectly, right? So the assumption, for instance, folks in most finance organizations believe that we can predict the future to 9 decimal places, right? I believe we can predict the future to maybe an order of magnitude. So when I have a new product that's going to come out in 9 months or a year, I can't give someone a precise number that says this will be worth 8.4 million euros in the next fiscal year. I can only do some rough estimations with input from sales and finance and other folks that says this set of features might be worth 3 to 7 million euros next year. And part of that's dependent on sales and marketing and everyone else actually doing their jobs. So rather than, in the same way that when somebody asks me when the software is going to ship, they really want me to say Tuesday the 14th at 8:45 a.m. GMT, right, next year, as if anyone on the planet can truly predict when a piece of software is going to ship and be done and still achieve its goal. We're talking about estimates. We're talking about error bars. We have to get used to the uncertainty of it's about this big.
Right, but if I I totally agree with you. And I think this dichotomy, like of uncertainty in software, and many times the software being more complex than it actually seems like at the beginning. So
Always.
even if I would give you a date, that date will be wrong, right? And the requirement of being more precise. I mean, that's dichotomy is something that we have to struggle with. And it's a little bit the same, you know, when the sales come saying, oh, I have a deal tomorrow, especially in enterprise and in B2B. And that deal means that I have a customer that is paying 1 million today.
Yes.
And on the other side, what do we counter with? I mean, if we have nothing and nothing precise.
Good. So let's try to prepare for that conversation before it happens. If we're running into that conversation unprepared with no information, no answers, we've already lost that discussion, right? Because $500,000 today, in the eyes of the sales and marketing organization and probably your CEO, is worth more than some vague qualitative strategic thing in the future that may not happen, right? So I would say that, first of all, we want to look at the top 2 or 3 things on our roadmap, and we want to attach error bar gross estimates to them. Let me give you an example. We have 5 or 6 or 8 different pieces of technology underway and programs and products and things that are going to help our consumers for our streaming music service onboard themselves faster and get signed up faster, more easily, right? Okay. And we know this is a problem because we're having a lot of churn, folks who sign up for the service and never use it. And we have a lot of incomplete or dropped signups where people get through part of the forms and they don't complete them, right? So that's a technical problem, but it's also a business problem. And we, as product folks, should be able to put these 3 numbers together, because everything I'm going to do here is going to be 3 numbers that multiply, because that's the simplest thing we could do. We could say our abandon rate in our shopping cart for signing up for the service is 35% today. We think we could make a bunch of technical improvements that would reduce that by 5%. Okay, so 5% is our improvement. Guess, estimate. We know how many people are coming into the funnel every month, 100,000. And we know what an annual subscription is worth, £9 a year. Okay? So we have the actual value price of one user. We have our funnel. And we have our wild guess for how much improvement we could make. Notice now we can multiply those together. 100,000 people a month times £9, so that's 900,000 pounds on the table, of which we hope to save 5% more or put 5% on the top line. So we divide that by 20, we get 45,000 pounds a month, or £500,000 a year, right? Now, is that precise? Absolutely not. But it lets us have the discussion that says this series of projects and work and technology is vaguely, roughly worth to the company £250,000 to £750,000 a year. Okay? And we want to do that before we start the work, before we're committed, before it's on the roadmap, so that we can have a sensible discussion. And then when someone else brings us an idea that says, well, I think qualitatively we could be taller and better looking if we just added this new feature in, we now have a basis to compare. We could say, well, that sounds really exciting. I love your idea. That's great. But the 3 things on the roadmap right now, one is worth $500,000 a year, plus or minus. One is worth $2 to $4 million a year. That's opening up a new market. And one of them is worth $5 to $10 million a year because that's some other reason, right?
Yeah.
Now, I'm not willing to display something on my roadmap for anything less. Notice now we're talking about money and not backlogs or technology. For me to be able to say, if you can't show me a business case or help me do a business case that's worth $2 to $5 million a year, I'm not going to slow down the things that are worth $2 to $5 million a year, because the company cares about that. And the entire company is going to be on my side, because we don't want to throw away $2 to $5 million in return for 200 to 500,000.
Right. I mean, I think this is a really concrete tip. Basically, like what you're saying is like, don't take anything into your roadmap until you know how much it's worth. Because in that point, you can have those that when the person comes with directly, you know, if you have this 500,000 initiative or 2 million initiatives and someone comes with 100,000, then, I mean, you show that you have like a business understanding. And I mean, you also have something to back it up.
That's right.
In this, I think, I mean, and I recognize myself maybe a little bit of a younger self. With at least, I put but I see many people doing this. I'm not so comfortable with like doing hunch job. You know what I mean? I mean,
well,
like,
sure.
How do we overcome that?
So I think that's an internal barrier. If we think about how our sales organization estimates revenue for next year, it's no more scientific than that, right? The CEO and the VP of sales or the chief revenue officer sit down and say, we need to bring in 35% more money next year than we brought in this year. Go figure out how to do it, because that's your target, right? And the sales leader divides it up, and there's territories and there's accounts and whatever. But honestly, nobody in sales knows how we're going to hit that number 6 months in advance. But they say it as if they have assurance, right? And so I think we have to relax our inner critic a little bit to say, because we keep attaching error bars to this, we get to say our best guess, our assumption, our belief is that opening up the Latin American market is going to be worth 4 to 8 million next year. And we invite the sales team to either agree or disagree, and the CEO and the finance folks before this conflict starts. And then I actually have my folks put it on the roadmap. So there's a swim lane that says, open up Latin American market. And right below that, it says 4 to 8 million. And then there's a bunch of boxes on that roadmap, maybe now, next, later, about what we might do to open up the Latin American market, languages and currency and, policy and whatever else. But when someone criticizes one of the little tiny boxes that's for Latin America, I don't argue that one little tiny piece of work. I go back to the strategic goal. And then every time I present the roadmap, I name those 3 swim lanes and I call out the money so that everybody understands, because, by the way, their retention on this is 0, right? Every week I do it and every week they forget. So every week I'm going to call out that the Latin American market opportunity is 4 to 8 million. And eventually people are going to figure out that I'm not going to give up on that market and that theory and that OKR and that swim lane unless there's something equally big or bigger, right? And that sets the lower bound, the bar for these kinds of interruptions, right? Good. One other thought, because I think it's important. I would say, and I've said for decades now, that about half of all the work we do isn't actually about bringing new revenue in. It's about keeping our products alive and healthy and our customers and users happy. And we're almost never going to be able to put a cost justification or a revenue justification against most of those things. We call it business as usual. We call it keeping the lights on. I call it having a healthy product. And so about half of all the things we do, we're not going to have this discussion about. We're not going to say, oh, you're right, I'm going to sacrifice all of our security investments this quarter for your deal, because we'll be out of business in a quarter. And I'm not going to say, oh, scalability isn't as important as your one customer, or fixing bugs, right, or working on our architecture. So we have to set aside, we have to separate about half of all the work we do that's internal facing, because we're not going to be willing to trade those off for a deal.
And I think that's the question that I was about to ask, because there is, I mean, it all sounds great, right? I mean, it's like you are able to quantify, and especially in the example that you had in the beginning, when you have like already some paying customer, you have a numbers, a guess on the churn, and a guess on how much they're gonna bring up in every month. I mean, that is like, I believe the majority of us will be comfortable in doing that math. But then there are other ways, right? There is like, how do I quantify maintenance? How do I quantify security? How do I quantify, the new laws that are coming in about accessibility or anything like that? How do you do it?
So I actually don't think we can sell those to the marketing side of the house. again, in the enterprise space where an account team may only have one or two big deals this quarter, and they're paid and bonused handsomely to close those deals, and they're salespeople, which means they have great skills to convince people of things and to get it closed. And a key skill for salespeople is when they hear no from the customer, they find someone else there to say yes, or they keep pushing, they keep selling, they keep positioning. So I'm not surprised ever when a salesperson comes to me and says they need a new feature added and I say no. We joke that the definition of a millisecond is the time between when I tell a salesperson they can't have what they need to close their most important deal and when they escalate to the CEO. Right?
Yeah.
So my saying that we have a bunch of UX things to fix is never going to help there, right? So we have to, again, bring up the discussion from one little box on our roadmap to what's our strategy, what's our OKR, where's the money coming from? And I'm always trying to separate out or present the half of the work that's market-facing and revenue-generating. Because if we take a new piece of market-facing customer-requested feature, we're going to have to drop another feature that the world sees. We're not going to drop scalability. We're not going to drop compliance. We're not going to drop bug fixing or architecture or throughput or system resilience. Because if we do those things, we as product folks should expect to be out of a job in a quarter or two. So I always present trade-offs with other market-facing revenue-related features. And again, usually I go to the very top of my chart, right? So what are the three most important products or initiatives or OKRs or whatever they are? And those are the ones that I'm comparing this to. Because if we steal engineers from anything, we're going to steal it from the major work. I don't know if you know this, but I've never met an engineering team that had any white space or slack or free time. Okay?
Never.
They're always overcommitted. They're always late. They're always optimistic. And so I want to not argue in the tiny details here. I want to come back with the company strategy that says we at the company level, at the CEO level, have agreed that the two most important initiatives of the half year are opening up the Latin American market and dramatically reducing the churn as we onboard new users or whatever they are, right? Which are worth 7 figures, 8 figures. And I'm not willing to sacrifice by a quarter or two. We can do the math, by the way. We could say if it's worth $3 million a year or $4 million a year, that's $1 million a quarter. Mm-hmm. So if I delay that by a quarter for your 100,000 deal, we as a company are 900,000 short. And you may be happy with that because that's your account, but let's go up the chain to the head of sales and the CEO and ask whether pushing back $1 million is a good idea to get 100,000. I suspect not, right? So one last thought there and then back to you. Most heads of sales are quoted or commissioned or paid on the total sales of the company. Mm-hmm. Most sales teams are not. They're quoted on their one deal. So I often go back to the head of sales for these trade-offs because the individual sales teams will never agree with me, but I can make the trade-off case with the head of sales by saying, you will make less money this quarter if we make this trade, and your chance to retire to Fiji or Malta, wherever it is that you want to go, will be pushed back by a year because we're making a bad trade at your level. And then usually the sales lead, the sales VP or CRO, will agree with me because I've spoken in the language that they care about the goal they care about.
But this, I think it's there's like another really concrete tip here in what you said, is that not all work can or should be quantified. So that's
Yes.
the first thing, right? That to divide, kind of label the type of work. This is the type of work that is for, you call it internal, but I mean, it could be anything that, I mean, it's for something else that is not directly revenue generating.
Right.
And then there is something else that is more like on the revenue generating. That's where we're doing the trade-offs and then we're doing all those discussions. But I think here as well, as a PM in a team or as a product leader, you can also do, like if someone is trying to pull capacity to do something that is directly money generating from something that is like was agreed that is supposed to be for I don't know, some use like something else, like security, or like you have
Yes.
snappier response of your website, of your app, whatever. That is also a way of like escalating. Like,
It is.
and then
It is.
and then you're like, it's security or like current business versus
That's right.
new revenues.
And there's almost always an ally or collaborator at the executive level who needs that, right? So in general, what I find is that these kinds of requests come from one department, one function, and I'm perfectly willing to drop a note to the head of compliance saying, I'm being requested to cancel the compliance work we've signed up for you on the roadmap. So I would suggest that you, as the head of compliance, go back to sales and tell them this is not optional, right? Or we're always fixing bugs and making improvements for our support and our customer experience teams. And the head of that team lobbies me all day long to fix more bugs, not to close deals. And so we're going to have some amount of bugs or fixes or improvements for them in the stream, in the workflow. And I want to make that person my ally so that when we go back to the executive team and the head of sales says we need to throw the whole roadmap away for Project X, marketing is coming back to say, yes, but some of what you're going to throw away was for marketing. Support's going to come back and say, yes, but you can't do that because we have these urgent tickets and outages, and right? And finance is going to come back and say, well, we need those changes to the database so we can do our financial reporting, right? Notice what I've done is I formed a coalition government here briefly,
Yeah.
where we're not just talking about the one deal, we're talking about the health of the company and the health of the product. And there's nothing on the roadmap that doesn't have an ally or some collaboration to it.
For sure, there's at least the person who have pitched into the roadmap.
That's right. And notice this is not an analytical problem. This is not solved by having a longer spreadsheet. This is a people problem. This is a politics problem. This is an organizational style problem where, as a product leader, I have to engage the organization and the people in a way that's very different from how engineers and product folks work together.
And then you also, like, you need to have this argument and you need to have those allies on one side, and then you also have to be able to bridge that on the other side, where maybe like that's what you were talking about at the beginning with the two different languages.
That's right. I think of this as a bilingual problem. When we're talking to our designers and developers and makers and test engineers and documentation folks and whoever, we're talking the language of value and qualitative and why people are going to love it and how it's going to help the world and the goals of the product and money sometimes. But when we're talking with the money side of the business, we have to speak in their language, which is short-term money versus long-term money, right? Risk to the company, and markets rather than individual accounts. In general, I expect salespeople to think about one account at a time. But as product folks, we have to think about whole segments, whole markets, which is a different thing. So we're going to keep coming back to talk about the 10,000 market opportunities, not the one.
Right. So what I hear you saying is basically you need to know that you need to be bilingual in a way, and to talk this language of money, you need to have your homework done, because you need to know like how much money is in the initiatives in the new roadmap. You need to understand like generally how your organization works, so you have your like whom to escalate. And then the third part is also like really concretely have an understanding and dividing the capacity that you have when you have some that are like generating money and some that aren't generating money. So like with all this in your toolbox, then you can be able to have those discussions that at the end of the day is about like what do we optimize for.
Sure. And I would just observe that almost no one who's come up in product management, particularly from the engineering or design side of the world, finds this a natural, native conversation, right? Now, I did an MBA way back in the day, so I have some more financial background, but this is not how we talk to each other, and this is not how we talk with our development teams. So it's not, there's no shame here in not knowing how to do it, right? It's not natural, it's not obvious, but I think we have to teach ourselves or teach each other how to do this, because otherwise we don't get a seat at the executive table.
For sure. And also there is a big trend right now where product people are labeled as they don't understand the business, and maybe this like different type of talk, the talk about the money versus the talk about the users or the processes is what is generating this friction.
Yes, absolutely. By the way, if we oversteer and we talk mostly about money, we have the same sort of criticism from our maker side.
On the other side,
that we don't know enough engineering and we're not in touch with what they're doing. So this is a balancing act. It's hard to get exactly right. We always stumble and make errors, but I think we have to find that middle space, that gray area where part of the time we're talking about money and part of the time we're talking about joy and user value and making the world better.
Yeah, and I think, it's Marty Kagan, right, that says you have to solve like real users' problem in a way that work for the business. That's exactly it. It's not only about user problems, it's not only about the money, it's the combination of both. And then you have to find the way of bridging it to all your different stakeholders in a way or another.
Sure. And one last thought there is, at the very, very beginning of any new product or initiative or release or whatever, that's the best time to do this homework. Because we need to know what our explanations are. We need to know what our reasons are before we engage the rest of the company in arguing whether they're incorrect, right? So some releases are about quality and scalability and back end, and some releases are about upsell, and some releases are about opening new markets, right? And we as product folks should know that answer before anybody writes their first line of code, right? What's the major outcome? What's the major success metric for this new product or new release? And then we run those very simple 3-number multiplications to say, if we could dramatically improve the usability of this product, then our renewal rates will go way up, and a 4% renewal rate increase is worth 10 million, an 8% renewal rate is worth 20 million, and I can't guess yet in between, but I'm going to tell you it's a 7 or 8 figure opportunity. So let us do our work.
So as early as possible, being really intentional on what you're optimizing for.
I would not assign engineers to work on something until I knew how I was going to judge success. Instead of the engineers all bring us back the features they built and we try to figure out why they're useful and where they go.
Yeah. That's product management 101, I would say.
Well, you would say that, but in my 4 decades in product management, mostly we skip that step. We go right to specs and user stories or whatever, and we don't ask the economic question at the very first day of why it's important. And then when we ship it, we have all these folks who come to us and complain because we can't explain why it's going to be exciting to the go-to-market side of our company.
Yeah. So it's not only why, but also how much.
How much, yes. And it's how much with big error bars, but it's how much to the nearest order of magnitude. Is it a €100,000 a year idea? Is it a 10 million euro a year idea? I can tell the difference between those two things without having written a line of code.
For sure. And thank you, Rich. I think you gave us really concrete ideas on how to do it, like do it early, put the money on it, divide the type of work, find the lies, and also maybe more on a personal level, be okay with something being just on order of magnitude and not being super precise. That's how others do, so we should be comfortable doing that as well.
Spot on.
Thank you, Rich, for sharing your wisdom with us.
It's my pleasure, and thanks for letting me join.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Product Academy Tough Stuff.
We hope today's tough question gave you practical, actionable insights.
If you enjoyed the episode, do us a favor and leave a rating or review. It will help us grow the podcast and make future episodes even better.
Got a question for us? Send an email to toughstuff@productacademy.ch and ask away. We read any submission and might answer yours in a later episode.
Thank you again for listening. We'll see you next time with another tough challenge to tackle.
Until then, take care.